Ancient animal bones hold humanity's oldest conversations with the gods. These mysterious oracle bones from China's Shang dynasty were used to predict the future, communicate with ancestors, and record some of the earliest writing ever discovered. By the end of this story, you will understand how these cracked fragments completely rewrote history, transforming a mythical dynasty into a real, powerful kingdom. We will uncover how kings posed urgent questions to the spirit world and how modern scholars finally cracked their 3,000-year-old code. How do you think ancient rulers decided their most critical choices? It all began with a desperate search for a cure. In the late 19th century across China, people were grinding up ancient animal bones and turtle shells to make traditional medicine. They called these fragments dragon bones, believing they held mystical healing properties. A scholar and antiquarian named Wang Yirong was suffering from malaria when his servant returned from the pharmacy with a packet of these very bones. As the story goes, Wang Yirong, a man deeply knowledgeable about ancient scripts, was examining the bones before they were powdered. His eyes widened. He was not looking at random cracks or natural patterns. He saw precise, deliberate markings carved into the surface, markings that bore a striking resemblance to a very ancient and largely unknown form of Chinese writing. The malaria was forgotten. In that moment, a 3,000-year-old secret began to unravel. He immediately sent his servants out to buy every single dragon bone they could find from every pharmacy in Beijing. The sheer volume of inscribed pieces confirmed his incredible hunch. These were not just bones, they were messages. The pharmacies had been unknowingly pulverizing history itself, selling priceless archives as mere medicine. Wang Yirong's discovery ignited a chain reaction among intellectuals. At first, there was widespread confusion. How could writing be on something as fragile as bone? Who would do such a thing, and why? Scholars initially thought they might be forgeries, or perhaps belong to a much later period. But the script was unlike anything they had seen, more archaic and complex than even the oldest bronzes. The pieces of the puzzle started to fit together slowly, painstakingly. These were the lost records of the Shang dynasty, a civilization that Western historians had often dismissed as purely mythical. Here was the proof, not in grand monuments, but in these humble, cracked fragments. They were historical records of the most intimate kind, detailing the questions and concerns of kings. The realization was earth-shattering. The entire understanding of Chinese civilization had to be rewritten, pushed back centuries into the past based on the evidence from these very bones. How did such a sophisticated system of divination work, and what were the kings so desperate to ask their ancestors? These messages from the kings were not written on just any surface. They were inscribed onto the shoulder blades of oxen and the flat, pristine undersides of turtle shells. These were the oracle bones, carefully selected and meticulously prepared for a singular, sacred purpose. The Shang royalty chose these materials with profound intention. Oxen were central to their society, symbols of great strength and agricultural abundance, while turtles, with their long lifespans and connection to water and earth, were seen as creatures that bridged the mortal world and the spiritual realm. Their shells were considered miniature models of the cosmos itself. Before a divination could even begin, these bones underwent an elaborate transformation. Craftsmen would painstakingly polish the surfaces until they were smooth, then drill hollows into the back of the bone or shell in neat, orderly rows. This preparation was itself a ritual, a physical act of reverence that made the object ready to receive the questions of the king. When a critical decision loomed, the king or his diviner would pose a direct question to the ancestral spirits. Will the harvest be plentiful? Is it auspicious to launch a military campaign next week? Should we perform a sacrifice to a specific ancestor? The heat was then applied, typically with a hot metal rod pressed into one of the prepared hollows. The bone, stressed by the intense heat, would crack with a sharp pop. That sound signaled the moment the spirits had spoken. The pattern of the cracks spreading across the bone's surface was the cryptic answer. But the process did not end there. The diviners would then interpret the cracks, and often the king's question, the prognostication, and sometimes even the eventual outcome would be carved directly onto the very same bone right next to the cracks. This created a permanent three-part record of a single moment in time: the question, the omen, and the result. Why go to such extraordinary length? For the Shang kings, this was not superstition. It was statecraft. By consulting the ancestors, they were seeking legitimacy for their rule, demonstrating that their power was divinely sanctioned. Every cracked bone was a transaction with the divine, a way to transform uncertainty into action, all recorded for eternity on the most durable medium they could find. For centuries, the Shang dynasty lived only in ancient texts, a legendary line of kings shrouded in myth and mist. But the oracle bones did more than just confirm its existence. They tore away the veil, revealing a powerful, sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that flourished over 3,000 years ago. This was not a primitive society. It was a kingdom of immense complexity, with a capital city at Yin, sprawling palaces, and a social structure headed by a king who was both political ruler and high priest. Their mastery of bronze casting was extraordinary, creating not just weapons of war but intricate ritual vessels of stunning beauty, used in ceremonies to honor their ancestors. And at the very heart of this society was a profound belief that the world was governed by spirits, by royal ancestors who could intercede with a supreme deity, Shangdi. The king's primary role was to communicate with these powerful spirits to maintain the cosmic order. This is why the oracle bones are so invaluable. They are not merely artifacts, they are the direct transcripts of that communication. Through them, we hear the king's voice. We learn about his worries over border disputes, his plans for agriculture, his inquiries about the weather, and his elaborate schedules of sacrifices. Every cracked bone is a window into the priorities of a state, a snapshot of a moment where the human and divine worlds met. This kingdom, once a flicker in historical records, was now solid and real, its foundations proving to be the very bedrock of Chinese culture. So what exactly were these kings asking, and what can their personal anxieties tell us about the dawn of Chinese civilization? The king would approach the polished bone, the air thick with anticipation. This was not a private meditation but a public, state-sponsored ritual, a performance of power witnessed by his court. A royal diviner, a high-ranking official skilled in this sacred art, would step forward. He was the intermediary, the translator between the mortal king and the ancestral spirits. With a sharp tool, he would begin to carve the king's question directly into the smooth surface of the bone or turtle shell. The inscriptions were precise and formal. Will the queen's childbirth be fortunate? If we raise 3,000 soldiers and attack the Qiang tribe, will we receive assistance from Shangdi? The questions were urgent, practical, and deeply personal to the state's survival. Each one ended with a fixed formula, a plea directed at a specific ancestor, such as to Ancestor Ding we inquire. Once the question was permanently etched, the most dramatic moment arrived. A metal rod, heated in a fire until it glowed, was taken by the diviner. He would press its tip firmly into one of the pre-drilled hollows on the back of the bone. The heat seared into the material, and the stress had to find a release. A sharp popping sound would echo through the ceremonial space as a network of cracks, known as the omen, radiated across the bone surface. This was the answer. The spirits had spoken not in words but in this cryptic, branching pattern. The diviner's expertise now became paramount. He would lean close, studying the shape, the direction, and the length of every fissure. Certain crack patterns were considered auspicious, signaling divine approval and a green light for the king's plans. Others were ominously inauspicious, a clear warning from the ancestors to abandon a campaign or postpone a ritual. The interpretation was everything, transforming abstract lines into a concrete command. And then, in a final act of record-keeping, the verdict was often carved right beside the original question. Sometimes, weeks or months later, a scribe would even add the actual outcome. We attacked and captured 250 prisoners. The queen did indeed give birth to a son. This created a complete historical ledger, a single artifact holding the entire story of a royal dilemma from question to result. The entire ceremony, from the first incision to the final interpretation, was a profound display of controlled chaos. It was the Shang dynasty's way of governing, of making impossible decisions by believing they had a direct line to the ultimate authority. But these messages were written in a script so ancient that for 3,000 years no one could read them. How did modern scholars finally manage to crack this code and understand what the kings were saying? The language etched beside the cracks is the true key to the mystery. These inscriptions represent the oldest confirmed writing system in East Asia, a script so ancient it predates the philosophical texts of Confucius by 1,000 years. Known as oracle bone script, its characters are the direct pictorial ancestors of the modern Chinese characters used by over 1 billion people today. You can see the evolution frozen in time. The character for horse, for instance, is not an abstract symbol. It is a simple, elegant drawing of a horse, complete with a mane, 4 legs, and a tail. The word for cart looks like a chariot viewed from above, with 2 wheels and a central axle. This was a writing system in its infancy, where the link between the object and its symbol was direct and visually obvious. The scribes carved these pictograms with remarkable precision using sharp bronze or stone tools, creating fine, angular lines that followed the contours of the bone. And here is a crucial detail that solidifies their purpose as records. The inscriptions were almost always carved after the divination ritual was complete, after the heat was applied and the cracks had formed. The scribe would first record the date and the diviner's name. Then he would etch the original question posed to the ancestors. In some extraordinary cases, perhaps weeks or months later, a final note would be added, verifying the actual outcome of the event. This creates a powerful, self-contained historical document. One bone might contain the entire story, from a king's anxious query about a toothache, to the cryptic omen read from the cracks, to a simple, final notation that confirmed the king's toothache did indeed subside. This 3-part structure transforms these bones from mere religious objects into the earliest known archives of a civilization, a direct line of communication not only with the gods but with history itself. How did scholars, staring at these cryptic drawings, begin to decipher a language lost for millennia? Deciphering this 3,000-year-old code felt like trying to solve a puzzle where most of the pieces were missing. For the first scholars who examined the oracle bones, the inscriptions were a forest of unfamiliar, angular pictures. They had no dictionary, no grammar book, no key of any kind. The script was fundamentally different from modern Chinese, and the few characters that looked vaguely familiar had evolved almost beyond recognition over the millennia. The task seemed nearly impossible. How do you even begin to understand a language when you do not know a single word? The breakthrough came from a stroke of brilliant historical triangulation. A scholar named Luo Zhenyu made a crucial connection. He knew from much later historical texts, like the records of the Grand Historian, which listed the names of the Shang dynasty kings. These names were passed down through legend, but there was no physical proof they were real. Luo Zhenyu wondered if those royal names might be preserved on the bones themselves. He began searching for groups of characters that appeared with unusual frequency, especially in the parts of the inscriptions that seemed to be formal addresses. His persistence paid off. He identified specific, recurring character combinations that perfectly matched the temple names of the Shang kings from the ancient lists. He had found his Rosetta Stone. For example, one common grouping of characters was found at the end of many questions. By comparing it to the historical king list, he realized this was the name King Wu Ding. Suddenly, a single pillar of understanding was erected in the middle of the chaos. With the king's names firmly identified, other pieces of the linguistic puzzle began to snap into place. Scholars could now look at the context surrounding these names. If an inscription started with the name Wu Ding and was followed by other recognizable pictograms, like one for soldier or harvest, they could start to deduce the meanings of the surrounding characters. They slowly built a vocabulary from the ground up, using the royal names as fixed points on their map. This was not a quick process. It took decades of meticulous work, comparing thousands of fragments, looking for patterns and repeated phrases. But once the king's names were unlocked, the entire world of the Shang dynasty began to open up. The cryptic messages started to yield their secrets, transforming from indecipherable scratches into the urgent, personal questions of long-dead rulers. We could finally hear their voices, but what were these kings so worried about? What pressing issues compelled them to seek answers from the spirit world? The king's questions, now deciphered, reveal a world where the divine was consulted on matters both monumental and surprisingly mundane. Every crack in the bone was an answer to a pressing concern, transforming these artifacts into a comprehensive royal diary. Military strategy was a constant preoccupation. A king might ask, if we raise 5,000 men to attack the Gongfeng tribe, will we receive heaven's assistance? The answer from the cracks would determine whether a campaign was launched, a border was defended, or prisoners were taken. The state's very survival depended on these divine military forecasts. But the very next divination could shift from the battlefield to the fields. A king's inquiry about the harvest was just as critical. Would the millet harvest be abundant this season? The prosperity of the entire kingdom, the food supply for thousands, hinged on the favor of the ancestors and the rains they could provide. The weather itself was a direct line of communication from the spirits. They sought to know if it would rain on a specific day, if a coming storm would be destructive, or if a prolonged drought would finally break. For an agricultural society, these were not casual questions about the climate, they were urgent petitions for survival. Then the focus would turn inward to the most intimate corners of the royal household. The health and continuity of the royal line were paramount. Kings anxiously inquired about a queen's pregnancy. Would her childbirth be fortunate? They asked about their own ailments, from troubling dreams to a persistent toothache, seeking to understand if an ancestor was displeased and needed a specific sacrifice to be appeased. Even the success of a royal hunt was a subject for divination. A hunt was not merely a sport, it was a display of the king's prowess and a vital source of food and materials. Would the hunt be successful? The answer affirmed his fitness to rule and provide. This incredible range of topics, from raising an army to soothing a tooth, shows us that for the Shang kings, there was no separation between the affairs of state and the personal spiritual realm. Every decision, every worry was filtered through this sacred process. The oracle bones were their daily planner, their medical journal, and their strategic command center, all inscribed onto a single, fragile surface. What happened, though, when the predictions failed, when the cracks foretold victory, but the army faced defeat? Yet the true power of the oracle bones lies not in the questions they hold, but in the answers that were later verified and carved beside them. This final, crucial step transformed them from tools of prophecy into one of the world's oldest and most reliable historical archives. Think of it as a royal scribe adding a final footnote to a prediction, confirming whether the ancestors were right. When a king asked if an attack would be successful, and the inscription later states, "We did indeed capture 500 prisoners," that bone becomes a verified military report. When a query about the harvest is followed by "the harvest was abundant," it becomes an economic record. This practice of recording outcomes provides historians with a direct, unfiltered window into the actual events of the Shang dynasty, free from the exaggeration of later mythmakers. Most astonishingly, these bone inscriptions independently confirmed the very existence and sequence of the Shang kings. For centuries, the names of these rulers were known only from a much later historical text, the Records of the Grand Historian, written 1,000 years after the Shang had fallen. Many scholars dismissed this list as legend or invention, but the oracle bones changed everything. Carved directly onto the shells and bones, scholars found the very same royal names in the very same order. The king list was real. This was a monumental validation, proving that a written historical tradition in China stretched back far earlier than anyone had dared to believe. The mythical kings were now historical figures, their reigns anchored in physical evidence. Beyond the royal court, the bones document the constant state of conflict that defined the era. They name specific rival tribes and fiefdoms like the Tufang and the Qiang, recording battles, skirmishes, and the mobilization of thousands of soldiers. We learn not just that there was war, but the specific opponents, the number of troops committed, and the tangible results in prisoners and plunder. These are the original dispatches from the front lines of a Bronze Age kingdom. Perhaps the most chillingly precise records are of the skies themselves. The Shang diviners were meticulous observers of the heavens, and they recorded celestial events with stark clarity. One of the most famous inscriptions reads, "The divination was performed on day Giyu. The king read the cracks and said, 'An eclipse is coming. It is not a good omen.' On day Jiachun, the eclipse indeed arrived. This is not a vague reference to a dark day. It is a specific, dated observation of a solar eclipse. Modern astronomers have been able to use these records to pinpoint the exact date of that eclipse to June 5th, 1173 BC. This level of precise correlation is almost unbelievable, allowing us to synchronize the Shang calendar with our own and granting us an absolute timeline for this ancient civilization. From royal successions to celestial alignments, the oracle bones give us a history written not by later chroniclers, but by the people who lived it, making their world startlingly immediate to our own. But these permanent records did not carve themselves. Behind every inscription stood a scribe, an artisan whose steady hand and sharp tools transformed a cracked omen into a historical document. These men were the unsung technicians of the divine, working with a toolkit that was both simple and brutally effective. Their primary instruments were bronze chisels and sharpened stones, tools hard enough to scratch into the dense, polished surface of oxbone and turtle shell. Imagine the pressure required, the precise control needed to incise characters that were often smaller than a grain of rice, all without the benefit of magnification. Each stroke had to be deliberate and confident, a testament to years of rigorous training. The evidence of this apprenticeship is still visible today. On some excavated fragments, scholars have found practice inscriptions. These are fainter, clumsier carvings, sometimes overlapping, where a novice hand learned the precise angles and curves of the ancient script on discarded pieces of bone. It is a powerful, humanizing detail, a glimpse of a young student practicing his letters over 3,000 years ago, learning the craft that would allow him to record the words of a king. The work was painstakingly slow. A single inscription with its dozens of finely rendered characters could have taken hours to complete. The scribe had to rotate the bone carefully, following its contours, ensuring every line was clear and legible. There was no room for error. A slip of the hand could ruin the entire ritual object, forcing a restart on a new, meticulously prepared bone. This was not mass production, it was sacred craftsmanship. Their work required more than just literacy. It demanded the patience of a jeweler and the strength of a stone carver. These anonymous scribes were the vital link, the ones who ensured that the voice of the king and the answer of the spirits would echo across the millennia, all through the delicate, enduring power of a mark made by hand. These ancient scribes left us a visual dictionary of their world, and we can now read its most important pages. The character for king is one of the most powerful and common symbols found on the bones. It is depicted as a broad axe, a weapon that symbolized supreme authority and the power to execute. This simple, stark image tells you everything about the nature of Shang kingship. It was rooted in military command and the ultimate power over life and death. Over 3,000 years, this axe shape evolved and abstracted, but you can still see its outline in the modern Chinese character for king, which is a horizontal line connecting three vertical strokes, representing the connection between heaven, earth, and mankind, a concept that grew from that original symbol of the axe. The very act of divination had its own character, a combination of lines that scholars interpret as a symbol for a crack forming in the bone. This character is the heart of the entire ritual, a direct pictograph of the moment the spirit world communicated. The character for rain is a beautiful and instantly recognizable picture. It shows a horizontal line representing the sky with little droplets falling down from it. When a king asked if it would rain, this is the character the scribe would carve next to the query, a simple yet elegant depiction of a phenomenon that could mean the difference between a feast and a famine. The harvest was the kingdom's lifeblood, and its character shows a plant with grain hanging heavily from its stalk. You can almost see the field of ripe millet in that single symbol, a direct representation of agricultural success that was so vital to the state's survival. The character for war is particularly striking. It is composed of two elements, a symbol for a battle axe and another representing a shield. Together, they create a complete narrative of conflict, of attack and defense, perfectly capturing the essence of warfare in two compact components. Finally, the character for ancestor is profoundly important. It appears as a pictogram that likely represents a memorial tablet, a physical object used in rituals to honor the dead. This character is central because the entire practice of oracle bone divination was built upon communicating with these ancestors. Every crack was a response from a spirit represented by this very symbol. Seeing these characters evolve is like watching history unfold. The modern character for rain still has that same horizontal skyline at the top, with the droplets now represented by four simpler strokes underneath. The character for harvest has streamlined, but the idea of a plant with grain remains visually intact. Each one of these symbols is a direct link, a 3,000-year-old thread connecting our modern world to the urgent concerns of a Shang king. He was not just asking abstract questions, he was carving his fears about the weather, his hopes for food, and his plans for battle using a living, visual language that we can still understand today. One of the most poignant examples of this intimate process comes from the reign of King Wu Ding and his concern for his consort, Lady Hao. She was not just any royal wife, but a formidable military leader and landowner in her own right, making her well-being a matter of state importance. As her pregnancy advanced, the king's anxiety became a series of formal inquiries etched onto turtle shells. The diviners asked a sequence of precise questions. They wanted to know if the childbirth would be fortunate. They sought to divine the specific date, asking if Lady Hao would give birth on a Zhengian day. Most tellingly, they asked about the child's gender, posing the question, will Lady Hao's child be a son? The entire court held its breath, awaiting the cryptic answers that would form in the heated bone. The outcome, faithfully recorded by a scribe, provides a rare and complete story. The records show that the divination was performed and the result was noted. Lady Hao did indeed give birth, and it was on a Dingyu day, not the Zhengian day they had inquired about, and she gave birth to a son. This single case study transforms the ancient practice from an abstract ritual into a deeply human drama. We feel the king's personal worry for his wife and his political concern for a male heir. We see the process unfold from question to verified result, all preserved on a shell that was once held in a diviner's hands. This is history at its most immediate, a 3,000-year-old bulletin about the joy and relief surrounding the birth of a prince. But what happened when the cracks foretold victory, yet the army returned in defeat? The oracle bones reveal that the ancestors were not always right. We find inscriptions where the predicted rain never fell, or a military campaign blessed by the spirits ended in disaster. For a system built on absolute divine authority, these failures presented a profound challenge. The Shang worldview, however, was remarkably flexible in the face of contradiction. A failed prophecy did not mean the gods were unreliable. It meant that human understanding had faltered. The fault always lay with the living, never with the ancestral spirits. Perhaps the ritual had not been performed with perfect precision. Maybe the sacrificial offerings were not generous enough to gain the ancestors' full favor. Or, most commonly, the diviner himself had simply misinterpreted the complex language of the cracks. The king's authority was not diminished by these failures, it was reinforced. He held the sole power to determine that the original reading was flawed, allowing for a new divination to be conducted, a new question to be posed. This created a self-correcting system where the divine will remained infallible, and the king's role as its chief interpreter was constantly reaffirmed. It reveals a sophisticated relationship with the supernatural where the message was sacred, but the translation was a human art, vulnerable to error and open to revision. The cracks in the bone were absolute, but their meaning was always ultimately in the hands of the king. Their survival for 3,000 years is a miracle of material science. These oracle bones are not merely artifacts, they are time capsules, and their journey to our present day depended entirely on the specific conditions of their burial. After a bone had been used, inscribed, and the outcome recorded, it was not discarded. It was treated as a sacred document and carefully archived. The majority of the bones we have today were discovered in massive storage pits located within the Shang capital at Yingzhou. These were not random holes in the ground, but deliberate, organized repositories, essentially the national archives of their time. The environment within these pits became the key to preservation. Sealed deep underground, away from sunlight and fluctuating temperatures, the bones were protected from the two great enemies of organic material, oxygen and biological decay. The soil chemistry in the region, slightly alkaline and stable, created a perfect natural time vault. This slow, quiet entombment prevented the bones from crumbling into dust, allowing them to endure for millennia while empires rose and fell above them. The inscriptions themselves possess a remarkable duality. The primary method of writing was through carving. The scribes used sharp tools to incise the characters directly into the hard bone surface. This physical gouging is why the script has survived. Even if the surface eroded slightly, the deep grooves of the characters remained legible. But on a very small number of fragments, scholars have found something even more extraordinary: traces of cinnabar pigment. This vibrant red mercury-based compound was used to fill the carved characters, making them stand out vividly against the pale bone. The intention was clearly for important records to be visually striking and easy to read. While the pigment itself has often faded or flaked away over the centuries, its microscopic residue confirms that these were once colorful, highlighted documents. To confirm the incredible age of these bones, modern science has stepped in with radiocarbon dating. This process measures the steady decay of radioactive carbon-14 atoms within any once living organism. By calculating how much of this isotope remains in a sample of bone or shell, scientists can determine its age with remarkable accuracy. When applied to the oracle bones, the results were definitive. The carbon-14 dates consistently point to a time frame between approximately 1600 and 1050 BC, squarely aligning with the traditional dates for the Shang dynasty. This scientific evidence silences any remaining doubts, providing an independent chemical verification that these messages are indeed 3,000 years old. The science tells us not just when the animals lived, but by extension when their bones were used for divination. Every crack and character we see today is a direct result of this unique combination of ancient archival practices and a forgiving environment. They were stored with purpose, forgotten by chance, and preserved by the earth itself, waiting for the moment we would learn how to read them again. The map of oracle bone discoveries draws a stark border around the heart of Shang power. Nearly all of these inscribed fragments have been unearthed from a single, sprawling archaeological site, the last Shang capital known as Yin, located near the modern city of Anyang. This was the empire's bustling nerve center for over 2 centuries, a metropolis of palaces, workshops, and royal tombs. It is here, in carefully dug storage pits, that the vast majority of the bones were found, deliberately archived like classified state documents. This concentration tells a clear story. The power to communicate with the ancestors was not a decentralized practice. It was a fiercely guarded royal monopoly, central to the king's authority. The ritual of divination was the engine of the state, and its operations were confined to the capital, ensuring that only the king and his court diviners could interpret the divine will for the entire kingdom. A handful of outliers, however, add intriguing complexity to this picture. A small number of oracle bones have been found at other, smaller sites like Zhengzhou and Luoyang, which were earlier Shang capitals or major regional centers. These rare finds suggest that members of the royal clan or very high-ranking nobles in these key cities may have been granted the privilege to conduct their own lesser divinations. Yet the scale is incomparable, a few scattered fragments versus the hundreds of thousands from Anyang. The geographic spread, or rather the lack of it, reveals a kingdom that tightly controlled its most vital resource, not grain or bronze, but information from the gods. This distribution paints a picture of a highly centralized state where spiritual authority was the ultimate source of political power, all radiating from the single, sacred source of the king at Anyang. If this power was so centralized, how did it all come to such a sudden and dramatic end, leaving these royal archives buried and forgotten for 3,000 years? The story of the oracle bones does not end with the fall of the Shang capital. When the Zhou dynasty rose to power, they inherited more than just a kingdom. They adopted the very writing system that had recorded the Shang's conversations with the gods. But this script did not remain frozen in bone. It underwent a remarkable transformation, migrating from the cracked surfaces of turtle shells to the gleaming, permanent walls of cast bronze ritual vessels. This evolution reveals a language in motion, adapting to a new era while preserving its ancient core. The angular, picture-like characters of the oracle bones began to soften and stylize. A character that was once a clear drawing of a horse with its distinct mane and legs started to become more abstract on the surface of a bronze tripod. The lines grew thicker and more uniform, a natural consequence of the casting process. Instead of being carved with a sharp tool, the characters were now inscribed into clay molds, a technique that favored smoother, more flowing strokes. This was not a break from the past, but a refinement. The Zhou scribes were standardizing the script, making it more efficient for a growing and administratively complex empire. The writing, now known as bronze script, lost some of its pictorial rawness but gained a majestic, formal beauty. You can see the direct lineage, like watching a child's features mature into an adult's. The family resemblance remains unmistakable. This continuity is the true secret. The Zhou, who conquered the Shang, did not erase their predecessors' culture. They absorbed it, proving that the most powerful conquest is not of land but of written memory. How does a writing system survive the collapse of the civilization that created it? It survives because the new rulers discover its power is too great to discard. The Zhou used this evolved script to inscribe their own histories and achievements onto vessels that were meant to last for eternity. They were declaring their legitimacy not as destroyers but as the rightful heirs to a grand cultural tradition. This unbroken chain of characters, from bone to bronze, forms the bedrock of a writing system that has endured for over 3 millennia, a living bridge connecting our world directly to the anxious questions of a Shang king. These ancient voices are now being amplified by the most modern tools. The same bones that survived 3,000 years in the dark earth face a new threat in the light, the slow degradation from human touch and exposure. To preserve them, science has stepped in with non-invasive digital eyes. Researchers are now using high-resolution 3D scanning to create perfect virtual replicas of each bone fragment. This technology captures every minute detail, the depth of a carved character, the subtle texture of the surface, and most importantly, the intricate web of the divination cracks themselves. Scholars can now spin this digital model on a screen, zooming in to examine the branching patterns of an omen from angles that would be impossible to see with the naked eye, all without ever risking damage to the irreplaceable original. It is like having the bone in your hands, but with the power to see through it. For inscriptions that have faded to near invisibility, another advanced technique comes to the rescue: multispectral imaging. This process involves photographing the bone under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. What appears as a blank, worn surface under normal light can suddenly reveal hidden characters when viewed under specific frequencies. The ancient ink residues or subtle changes in the bone's surface absorb and reflect this light differently, causing lost words to glow back into existence. It is a form of technological resurrection, pulling messages from the brink of oblivion and giving translators new pieces of the puzzle to work with. This digital revolution extends far beyond the laboratory. International teams of scholars are no longer confined to studying a single museum's collection. Massive online databases now compile thousands of these 3D models and enhanced images into a single, searchable global archive. A researcher in Beijing can instantly call up a bone fragment housed in a museum in Paris, comparing its inscription side by side with a similar one from a collection in New York. This collaborative power is accelerating the pace of decipherment at an unprecedented rate. Patterns that might have taken a lifetime for a single scholar to notice can now be identified by algorithms cross-referencing the entire corpus in seconds. The collective effort to understand the Shang world, once a slow and solitary pursuit, has become a vibrant, worldwide conversation, all fueled by the silent, enduring testimony of these bones. Even with all our modern tools, the oracle bones guard their deepest secrets. After more than a century of intense study, roughly a third of the characters found on these ancient fragments remain completely undeciphered. They are ghost words, silent symbols whose meanings have been lost to time. These stubborn inscriptions represent the final frontier of Shang studies, a locked door for which we have not yet found the key. The challenge lies in the nature of the script itself. Many characters are pictographs, drawings of tangible things, and those are often the easiest to solve. But what about abstract concepts? How do you draw a word like duty or favor or enmity? The Shang scribes developed complex characters that combined multiple pictographs to express these ideas, but without a living tradition to explain their logic, we are left guessing. Take one recurring, undeciphered character, for instance. It appears in military contexts, often near the names of rival tribes. It is composed of a symbol for a weapon and another that looks like a kneeling figure. Does it mean to subjugate, to take prisoner, or something else entirely, like to demand tribute? We can grasp its general sphere of meaning from the surrounding text we can read, but its precise definition eludes us. Another mysterious character shows a hand touching an eye. Does this signify to see? But there is already a perfectly clear character for to see, that is a drawing of an eye with legs, suggesting a person going to look. So is the hand and eye symbol something more nuanced, like to witness, to confirm, or even to weep. We simply do not know. These enigmatic symbols are not rare. They appear in otherwise comprehensible inscriptions, creating frustrating gaps in our understanding. We might be able to read 90% of a message, a king asking about a sacrifice to a specific ancestor, but the crucial verb describing what he is to sacrifice or the specific type of offering is one of these unreadable characters. It is like listening to a conversation through a wall. You catch the general topic but miss the most important detail. The process of decipherment is a painstaking puzzle. Scholars compare every single instance of an unknown character, analyzing its position in the sentence, the topics it appears with, and how its components change over time. They are detectives working with a 3,000-year-old cold case, where the clues are the subtle shifts in a single brushstroke. Why have these characters resisted all attempts at translation? Some may represent words for objects or rituals that vanished entirely from later culture, leaving no trace for us to follow. Others might be proper names of places, people, or titles that are otherwise unknown to history. Each undeciphered character is a lost piece of the Shang world, a whisper of a story we can no longer hear in full. What profound ideas or everyday objects are we still missing from our picture of this foundational civilization? The silence of these symbols is a reminder that for all we have learned, the past still holds its mysteries close. The bones tell us the king was not merely a ruler, he was the universe's primary switchboard operator. Only he could pose the most critical questions to the ancestors, and his interpretation of the cracks was the final, unappealable law. This was the ultimate source of his power, a divine mandate etched into bone. His authority was absolute because he alone held the exclusive right to translate the will of the gods into state policy, from launching armies to scheduling harvests. But the king did not work alone. The inscriptions repeatedly name a specialized class of royal diviners, men with titles like Kwe or Bin. These were not mere fortune tellers, they were high-ranking officials, the state's top administrators and theologians. They were the technicians of the sacred, the ones who physically performed the heating ritual and offered the initial reading of the ominous cracks. Their names, permanently carved beside the king's questions, grant them a form of immortality, marking them as the literate, powerful elite who managed the kingdom's direct line to the supernatural. Beyond this inner circle, the bones document a sprawling bureaucracy that managed the day-to-day affairs of a complex state. We find mentions of officials with specific responsibilities, the chiefs of the artisans who supervised bronze casting workshops, the officers of the fields who managed agriculture, and the chiefs of the horses who oversaw the royal stables and chariotry. Each title points to a specialized role, a cog in the administrative machine that reported its activities upward, where they might become the subject of a royal divination. And what of the people who grew the food that fed the court, who mined the ore for the bronze, who built the palaces and dug the storage pits? The peasant class is the silent, unnamed majority in these inscriptions. They are the implicit foundation upon which this entire theocratic state was built. Their labor in the fields produced the surplus that freed the elite to specialize in warfare, craft, and ritual. Their absence from the questions is itself an answer, revealing a society where the vast majority lived and worked to sustain the spiritual and political ambitions of a very few. This social pyramid, with the divine king at its apex and an anonymous population at its base, was not held together by force alone. It was cemented by a shared belief system, a conviction that the king's unique connection to the ancestors was what guaranteed rain for the crops, victory in battle, and harmony in the world. The oracle bones were the physical proof of that covenant, a record of a society where every level, from the monarch to the farmer, understood their place in a cosmos managed through cracked turtle shells. These bones are far more than historical artifacts in modern China. They are the bedrock of a cultural identity. For a nation with thousands of years of recorded history, the oracle bones provide the ultimate, undeniable receipt. They are the physical proof that the legendary Shang dynasty was not a myth, but a real, sophisticated kingdom, pushing the dawn of Chinese civilization back into the tangible world of bronze and bone. This validation is a source of immense national pride. They are classified as national treasures, receiving the highest level of protection and reverence. You can see them today in the hallowed halls of museums like the National Museum of China in Beijing, displayed under thick glass with careful lighting, not as curious relics but as founding documents. School children across the country learn about them in history classes, their angular script presented as the very origin of the characters they used to write their own names. This creates a direct, unbroken line stretching from a king's question, etched 3,000 years ago, to a student's homework assignment today. The continuity is the point. In a world of constant change, the oracle bones offer a profound sense of permanence, a declaration that Chinese culture is not just old but resilient and continuous. They are a link to a glorious foundational past, a reminder that the modern nation is built upon the achievements of one of the world's oldest and most enduring civilizations. This connection transforms academic history into a living heritage, making every citizen an inheritor of a story that began with a crack in a turtle's shell. The very authenticity that makes these bones priceless has also spawned a shadow world of deception. As the scholarly and collector demand for oracle bones skyrocketed, a black market emerged, feeding on greed and leaving a trail of destroyed history in its wake. Forgers skilled in the art of deception began creating sophisticated fakes to meet this illicit demand. Their methods are disturbingly clever. They start by acquiring old animal bones, sometimes from much later dynasties, to ensure the material itself passes a basic age test. Using modern tools, they meticulously carve replicas of ancient characters, often copying directly from published inscriptions. The final, crucial step is artificial aging. They might bury the bone in chemically treated soil, stain it with tea or smoke, or even deliberately chip and damage the surface to mimic the wear of millennia. To an untrained eye, the result can look convincingly ancient, a perfect fake that can fetch a small fortune from an unscrupulous collector. But these forgeries are more than just financial scams. They pollute the scholarly record, creating false data that can mislead research for years until they are finally exposed. The greater tragedy, however, lies not in what is faked but in what is brutally taken. The relentless hunt for genuine bones has fueled rampant looting. Tomb raiders, armed with little more than shovels and a disregard for history, descend on unprotected archaeological sites under cover of darkness. Their goal is not careful excavation, it is swift, violent extraction. They dig haphazard pits, shattering bones and tearing fragments from their original context. In archaeology, context is everything. Knowing precisely which pit a bone came from, what other objects it was buried with, and its precise stratigraphic layer is like having the address and biography of a historical figure. Looters erase all of that. A bone ripped from the ground becomes a mute object, its connection to other artifacts and its specific place in the timeline severed forever. We might be able to read the words on its surface, but we lose the story of why it was written and how it fits into the larger narrative of the Shang world. This is an irreversible loss, a page torn from the history book with no copy left behind. In response, a global effort to protect this heritage is underway. Major museums and research institutions now employ teams of specialists who act as historical detectives. They use every tool at their disposal to authenticate new acquisitions. Stylistic analysis scrutinizes the carving technique, comparing the stroke order and character forms against a vast database of known genuine inscriptions. Materials scientists might use microscopic examination or chemical testing to analyze the bone's patina and mineralization, looking for the natural decay patterns that are nearly impossible to replicate artificially. Governments, recognizing the bones as national treasures, have tightened laws against the export of cultural artifacts and intensified patrols of key archaeological zones. International agreements help to intercept smuggled goods and repatriate looted bones to their homeland. The battle is constant, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse between those who wish to preserve history and those who seek to profit from its destruction. Every fake that is spotted, every looted artifact that is recovered, is a victory in the fight to keep the voices of the Shang kings from being silenced by the very modern world that worked so hard to hear them. This deep-seated human need to seek guidance from beyond the visible world was not unique to the Shang. Across the globe, in the very same centuries, other great civilizations were developing their own intricate systems to communicate with the divine. In ancient Rome, priests known as haruspices performed a ritual called haruspicy. They would slaughter a sacred animal, often a sheep, and then meticulously examine its entrails, especially the liver. They believed the liver was the seat of life, and that the gods would inscribe their messages directly onto its lobes and surface. A smooth, healthy liver might signal divine favor for a military campaign, while a misshapen or spotted one could be a dire warning from the gods, causing a consul to delay an entire war. It was a practice of reading divine intent in the most intimate anatomy of a creature. Far to the east in Mesopotamia, scribes of Babylon and Assyria practiced a remarkably similar form of extispicy, creating detailed clay models of sheep livers covered in annotations. These were essentially training manuals showing apprentice diviners how to interpret every bump and mark. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece, the approach was less about reading organs and more about channeling a voice. Individuals would journey for days to remote sanctuaries like Delphi to consult the Pythia, the oracle of Apollo. She, seated over a fissure in the earth that emitted intoxicating vapors, would fall into a trance. Her cryptic, often riddling pronouncements were then interpreted by priests who translated her divine madness into political and personal advice for kings and commoners alike. The methods were wildly different, a sharp contrast between the Shang's precise cracking of bone and the Greek oracle's ecstatic speech, yet the underlying impulse was identical. From the Yellow River to the Tiber and the Euphrates, human leaders faced the same terrifying weight of uncertainty. They all grappled with questions of war, harvest, and health, and they all built elaborate, state-sponsored systems to manage that fear, to believe that the chaos of human existence could be ordered by a sign from the gods. The Shang kings looked for answers in the branching cracks of a turtle's shell, the Romans in the coiled complexity of a liver, and the Greeks in the whispered puzzles of a priestess. Each culture believed it had found the one true cipher for the divine, proving that the desire to know what lies ahead is a thread woven through the very fabric of human history. This practice forces us to confront a timeless dilemma. Did the Shang kings believe their futures were already written, the cracks in the bone merely revealing an unchangeable script, or were these rituals an attempt to bargain with destiny, to sway the cosmic powers and carve out a measure of control? The answer is not simple, and it reveals a sophisticated ancient worldview that blended both concepts. On one hand, the very act of asking a yes or no question suggests a belief in a predetermined outcome. The ancestors knew the answer, and the crack was a definitive revelation of a fixed future event. The king was not creating the rain, he was discovering whether it was already destined to fall. This view sees the universe as a clockwork mechanism, its gears turned by the spirits, with humanity as observers reading the dial. Yet look closer and you see a powerful undercurrent of agency. The king was not a passive recipient of fate, he was an active negotiator. By performing the correct rituals and offering the proper sacrifices, he believed he could gain the favor of an ancestor who could then intercede with the supreme deity Shangdi to change the outcome. A prediction of drought could be averted with a generous offering. A bad military omen could be reversed by honoring a specific spirit. In this light, the divination was not about reading a fixed future, but about testing the waters of the possible. It was a system for gathering intelligence from the spirit world to inform human action. The cracks did not command, they advised. The king and his diviners held the power of interpretation, and a clever reading could find a path forward even in an ominous sign. This was not a surrender to fate, but a complex dance with it. The Shang believed they lived in a participatory cosmos, where human ritual action was a force that could directly influence the divine machinery. Their free will was not the freedom to act outside this system, but the power to operate its levers through sacrifice, reverence, and the precise art of reading cracks. They sought not to defy the cosmos, but to align with it, using the bones as their compass. So, what does this tell us about our own place in the universe? The questions they carved are the same ones we still ask today, just through different means. The discovery of the oracle bones was a historical quake that permanently reshaped our understanding of civilization's dawn. Before their inscriptions were read, the Shang dynasty was a phantom, a line of kings mentioned in later chronicles but dismissed by many as mere legend. These cracked bones provided the birth certificate, transforming a millennium of myth into documented, undeniable history. This was not just the confirmation of a dynasty, it was the recovery of an entire worldview. We moved from knowing that the Shang existed to understanding how they lived, governed, and believed. The bones gave us the origins of Chinese writing itself, a living bridge of characters that has evolved for over 3,000 years, connecting the modern world directly to the thoughts of its most ancient rulers. Every time a person in China reads or writes today, they are using a system born from those very carvings. Beyond the script, the bones offered an unparalleled window into the engine room of early Chinese statecraft. We saw that the king's power was not just political but profoundly spiritual. He was the chief diviner, the sole conduit to the ancestral spirits, and his authority was legitimized through each ritual crack. This was a theocracy where every state decision, from warfare to agriculture, was filtered through a sacred lens. The bones are our transcript of that process, revealing a sophisticated bureaucracy, a complex social hierarchy, and a belief system that saw the human and divine worlds as inextricably linked. They provided the first reliable Chinese calendar, allowed astronomers to pinpoint eclipses with stunning accuracy, and documented military campaigns and royal genealogies that corroborated later historical texts. For these reasons, the oracle bones are not simply one archaeological find among many. They stand as one of the most important discoveries of all time, a key that unlocked the true depth and antiquity of Chinese civilization and gave a voice to a kingdom that had been silent for 3,000 years. The true secret of the oracle bones was never a single answer, but a profound legacy of ink and bone. These fragments are more than artifacts. They are a direct conversation with the minds of kings who shaped the dawn of a civilization. They reveal how power was forged not just by the sword, but through a sacred dialogue with the unseen, a timeless human effort to impose order on a chaotic world. Every crack in the shell was a step into the unknown, a testament to our enduring need to seek guidance for the future. The voices of the Shang have been recovered, but they are not alone. Countless other messages are waiting, buried in deserts, hidden in jungles, or resting in forgotten archives, each holding a piece of our shared story. What ancient secrets do you believe are still out there, waiting for their moment to speak? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of our